Oblivionauts! Aubrey Sitterson here, writer of Free Planet, No One Left to Fight, the comic book story of professional wrestling, and much, much more. And you are listening to the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Welcome to the Oblivion Bar podcast with your host, Chris Hacker and Aaron Knowles.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 189 of the Oblivion Bar podcast. I am Chris Hacker, one of your co-hosts here, and joining me this week is my BFF, Aaron Knowles.
I'm on the grid right now. I'm too busy watching the Tron Ares trailer over and over again.
Oh my gosh, Aaron, you just opened up a whole nugget of things I wanted to say about the grid and Tron Ares. Everyone, we got a trailer for Tron Ares, but we can't talk about it here today. For episode 189 of the Oblivion Bar podcast, we were talking to Aubrey Sitterson, the comic book writer of the upcoming Image Comics Free Planet. He also wrote Savage Hearts, No One Left to Fight, the comic book story of professional wrestling. So many things we get into in this conversation. And Aaron, I will say, sort of it's so great, right? But the hallmark, I think, of this conversation that you'll see almost immediately as we go into this interview with Aubrey is we didn't have enough time.
Oh my God. This could have easily have been like a 2 to 3 hour conversation.
100%.
This is like, and he is a guy who you want to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And we're so excited to release this interview because you guys will hear it as soon as you start listening. He is so passionate about the industry. Even though he spent like 20 something minutes talking about the one thing he usually doesn't want to talk about. And then we go into the actual comic.
We opened up with the one question he's been asked more than anything. And that, Aaron, you're so right too, when you say in this conversation that we put a lot of effort into asking questions that a lot of times these creators aren't being asked. That's something that we truly pride ourselves in here on the Oblivion Bar. And I found it interesting because he doesn't promote it anywhere. He says it in the conversation here in just a moment that he doesn't promote that he was once an editor over at Marvel and then eventually at Skybound eventually. But I found that interesting and I wanted to ask him about it. And then the first thing he says when we get in this conversation is like, oh, I used to never want to talk about this. But it does provide a pretty interesting and funny response. So
yeah, he is just a genuine down to earth. He is the person in the comic industry that you hope that every creator is.
Right. Yeah, we need more of this.
We need more Aubreys in the comic space who are willing to just open up. And like, it's so refreshing. Like this is, okay, I hate to say this, but there are some conversations where you're just like exhausted afterwards. And no.
Oh, okay.
I feel so like energized because it was so refreshing to talk to him.
Sure. Yeah. And I totally agree with you. But also I love the fact that he's someone that not only knows a ton about the medium of comics and loves it dearly, as you can tell, but he also is willing to like take risks. Like this is his career, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of people are nervous. Like I can tell you from someone, both Aaron and I talk to many creators here on the show, and we don't fault them at all for this, of course. But like some people kind of play it a little safe because they want to be successful, and they'll do all of these titles. They'll do spinoffs. They'll do IP. They'll do all these things to sort of get their footprint in comics. That way people know that they can do comics. And then they sort of get trapped in that, and that's all they can do anymore. And they get jaded by the industry and sort of leave it for a bit. Aubrey, you can tell almost immediately that he just wants to go immediately, like he says gonzo many times in this conversation. And I think it's a great sort of, apt way to describe his approach to comics.
I don't think it's, and not to knock anybody for going the safe route or the IP route or whatever. There's some people like that's where you thrive. Right. That's where you are good at. You have the passion. Like, I'm not saying any, like, not to name names, but like David Pepose.
Yeah.
Like he
killing it at Marvel.
He is killing it. He's killing it with Captain Planet, with Speed Racer, with all these Space Ghost, all Cable. These guys. And like that's not saying that he's playing it safe because he's taking what he loves and he's just running with it. So like, thrive where you can thrive, but it's you'll hear in this conversation, Aubrey Sitterson is a guy who thrives in his own element, and it is so awesome to talk to him about it.
Yeah, and as we said a moment ago, there's no time to talk about this book, everybody. Like, if you've read Free Planet #1, I hope you have. By the time that we put this conversation out, many people haven't, because we want to get this book out before FOC, which is April 14th, everybody, if you're listening right now. before we even get in this conversation, please, as a personal favor to Aaron and I, because we've read this first issue, call your local comic book shop and pre-order this first issue. You need to.
Yeah.
It's important for I don't want to make this too big, but it's important to the development of comics for this book to be successful, I think.
I
right?
have a strong feeling that this is going to be like one of those ones that people sleep on. And
that's what I'm nervous about.
And it disappears. Like it just like off the shelf.
Right.
Not like in a bad way. I mean, like it's just like you don't like what was it? Beneath the Trees Nobody Sees number 1.
Where they don't pre-order enough of them and people
like and there's just not enough on the shelf.
Yeah.
And it's just gonna go fucking nuts, you know.
I could totally see that. And we talk about it here. We discuss the ash can that he and Jed put out at Comics Pro a couple weeks ago, and how it's already insanely expensive because people are getting their hands on it.
Like $300 on eBay.
$300. I've seen a couple that recently they were going for like $150. Wild stuff for a book that, and I say this respectfully, Aubrey, who, he even says that like, this is not, they're not coming off Batman, they're not coming off Spider-Man. These two are sort of, up and coming creators in the space. And the fact that Free Planet is getting all this incredible press immediately before the books even came out is, I think, a good testament and a good gauge for how excited people are for this book already. And it's a dense book. There's a lot to take in, but gosh, is it better for it? That's all I'll say before we get in this conversation. So, Aaron, before we do that, please, can you tell the folks at home how they can support the Oblivion Bar podcast?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go over to patreon.com/Oblivion Bar Pod. You can support us by checking out the Patreon. And with that support, you can gain access to bonus episodes each week called The Grid. Behind the scenes look at each episode with our transcripts, Patreon polls, giveaways, just goodies like care packages. We sent a care package all the way to New Zealand.
Yeah.
And you know what?
Shout out to Mac.
That shit was expensive, but shout out to Mac because we fucking love him.
Yeah.
Like this is we do this all extra because we love what we do, and it's our unabridged, unabashed, unafraid, naked and afraid. The Grid. That's what it is. It's the Oblivion Bar after Dirk. And it is so much fun, and we're gonna be talking about some shit on there coming up. So pay attention to that. But also, you can give it a free 7-day trial. You can give it a shot just by going over to patreon.com/Oblivion Bar Pod. Check it out. The link is in our show notes. It's in all the places. You can find it on our website, oblivionbarpod.com. And just go.
Yeah, go check it out. Aaron sort of alluded to it there, everybody, and I just want to do a brief teaser because I don't know why this wasn't on the front of my brain immediately. Thank you for reminding me, Aaron.
You're welcome.
Big announcement this week.
Big
announcement, everybody. As you're listening to this, which will be on April 7th.
Don't press the issue, Chris.
At Oblivion Bar Pod, everybody. At Oblivion Bar Pod. Go follow us now because we're going to be releasing something very crucial midweek, mid to late week.
Only once. It's only going to happen once.
Only one time.
Only one time.
That's enough. Everybody, let's get into this conversation with Aubrey Sitterson.
And now, this week's special guest.
Joining us today is the comic book writer of titles like Savage Hearts, No One Left to Fight, the comic book story of professional wrestling, and the upcoming Image comic series Free Planet, a geopolitical space opera that tells the tale of the first completely free planet in human history has won its independence and the group of heroes that defend the planet's unique energy source. It is our pleasure to welcome Aubrey Sitterson onto the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Hey boys, thank you for having me. Man, I'm still just blown away that y'all got John Carpenter to do that intro music for you. It's amazing.
That's right.
It's amazing. I'm so glad he was able to squeeze it into a schedule.
And just like the Halloween theme, he did it in 10 seconds. He just got on the piano.
He doesn't remember. He doesn't remember doing that.
He was high the whole time. I don't know how he got there, but anyway, no, it's incredible. Aaron and I, we recently redid a lot of our intro music and things, and we really wanted to go for that like 80s synthy vibe, right? VHS.
Yeah, you hit it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And, Aubrey, thank you so much for being here. Gosh, we were talking a little bit before the recording, and you mentioned that you're hitting the gauntlet. And I'm curious, this wasn't a scripted question, but I have to know, being like
the Oblivion Bar is my favorite podcast I've done. Absolutely. There's no contest. Let me get right. Let me, I'm not going to make you ask it. I'll just go ahead and say.
I don't even have to ask it. Thank you so much for validating us. We appreciate it. You've done many shows leading up to even this Oblivion Bar appearance. Any particular show sort of can you highlight one that you've been on here recently that we can sort of halfway promote on the side here on a free promotion?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I actually
Bar?
spoke to the most recent one I did this past Thursday night. I spoke to Sasha from Casually Comics.
Oh, great. Yeah.
On YouTube, which was great. She's really great about sort of digging into comics with I don't know, like it feels academic the way that she approaches comics, which I love, because there's been, there used to be a lot more of that when comics had a thriving blogosphere, right? And it's been many years since that's been the case, but I miss that. I really loved the days of like having an RSS reader and there's just like 24 sites where people were just jibber jabbering about whatever comics they were digging those days. And, I never really, I never really successfully made the pivot to video in terms of my consumption habits. So I know it's out there. But yeah, no, Sasha was amazing. So yeah, hunt that one down, please.
Absolutely. Aaron, are you familiar with Casually Comics?
I'm not, but I love his description of it. And the only thing is, because I think that we have a very unique approach to our interviews and the way that we discuss comics here. And that's one thing that I love about the podcasting sphere is there's all these people that want to ask the same questions, where it's like, oh, who's your favorite superhero? Who do you want to draw? Who's your favorite team up? And over here, we like to focus.
Are we not getting into like
no, none of that.
I did not prepare properly if we're not getting into those.
We will ask you when the last time you cried. That's the only thing we have ready for you. That's really about it.
But yeah, we like to approach things like almost philosophically here, almost, like what's, we go a little bit deeper, and we like to, I don't know, somehow it just naturally brings up these
we're idiots that ask like better questions. That's what it comes down to. We're like self-aware idiots that know that you don't want to be asked, who do you like more, Spider-Man or Batman? Like that's kind of our approach.
Though. That's a decent question. That's not a bad question.
We could discuss that question pretty in depth, right? But I feel like you've been asked that maybe too much, Aubrey, I'm sure.
It's not that one specifically, but no, I mean, there are things that come up a lot on these types of shows when you're doing them. I've been talking a lot about my my editorial background. People have been asking questions about it. It's funny. For many years, before I did a podcast, I would straight up say, listen, I don't want to talk about editing comics. I don't want to answer any questions about it. Not because I'm embarrassed or I don't want people to know, or like it's shameful to me or anything, but so many former editors attempt to make the transition to being writers, and very few of them are able to actually swing it, right? I mean, except for historic, like I'm not talking about Roy Thomas or whatever, right? Like, aside from putting aside historical, like once Marvel and DC got a little bit stricter about allowing editors to write while they're working there, it became a much rarer thing. And, I always was wary of being perceived as someone trying to trade on past success or, and like, I never wanted to be one of these people who was primarily known for the job they used to have. Right. So like, I don't mention it. It's not in my bios. It's not, I don't mention it anywhere. And I used to tell podcasts, I don't want to talk about it. I want to keep my focus on the work right now. And I thought, this time out, like doing the podcast gauntlet for Free Planet, I thought, you know what? It's been so long and I've done so much stuff since then. The very first podcast I went on, it was Rosenberg. It was Ideas Don't Bleed. And he just launched immediately into questions about back when I edited comics at Marvel. So it's fine, but yeah, it is. I've since covered it almost every podcast I've done since then, including this one now. I brought it up. I'm the one.
You know what? We're going to go ahead and just exclude our editor question here that we had ready.
I can answer it.
And Aubrey, we actually do. We have a question. But
of course you do. Yeah. It's interesting stuff, and it is part of my background. And it's part of my journey in comics for sure. Yeah. I used to be very worried about getting nothing but questions about, what was it like working on Civil War? Can you tell us how you felt when the Steve McNiven pages came in? Yeah, what do you have holding there?
Books of Doom.
That's a cool one. Yeah, yep. Sure.
Yep. So, and you know what? Honestly, let's just go ahead and knock it out real quick, because I don't want to take too much time out of this, especially since you've been asked this a lot, I'm sure. And it totally backtracks and steps on the head of our earlier assertion that we ask really interesting, amazing questions that no one else asks. But that's hilarious. I love that. that we went straight into the question that you've already asked a ton, but I do want to know a little bit about that and sort of that time era. And Aaron, I can't remember if I had you asking this question.
It was you, but go ahead, because I have editing adjacent. It has nothing to do with what you've worked on.
Well, ask me one of these things.
Okay,
quit talking about obliquely about which question you're going to ask
Paper,
me.
rock, scissors.
Come on, let's go.
I haven't even asked the first question. We're already getting yelled at. Okay.
So of course you were an associate editor at Marvel, and I think it was Skybound as well at one point. I'm just curious.
Pre-Skybound, and I was only an assistant. So listen, I'm going to keep you honest. I was only ever an assistant editor at Marvel. I was the way, I don't know how they work things now, but at the time, even if you were an assistant, you were editing as primary editor, like 3 or 4 books a month, right?
Sure.
So I was only ever an assistant in terms of rank, but I edited my own books. And then after I left Marvel, I edited freelance for Kirkman, like prior to, like pre-Skybound, on Invincible, Walking Dead, and Astounding Wolfman. And I edited for Mark Miller and John Romita Jr. as well. I edited Kick-Ass 2, and then I did some stuff for Mark Guggenheim. He had a few Image books around that time too.
Sure. Now, okay. So what is, like, and obviously a lot of us know what the editor role is, but was that a rewarding role, being an editor? Obviously that's not something that you always wanted to do. You always want to make that transition into writing, it sounds like, but like, did you have a good time doing that? And what's like an interesting, memory or sort of anecdote from that time as an editor?
Like, as you alluded to, I became an editor because I wanted to learn to be a better writer. Right. That was my thinking. So, I enjoyed my time in editorial in so much as that I got to learn on the job for 3 years, right? From people who had been doing this for decades, and, getting to look at John Romita Jr. layouts, right? You can learn quite a bit that way, right?
Sure,
Working with the top tier creators in the industry, reading Ed Brubaker's scripts and, looking at colors that Dean White just turned in, I learned an immense amount, and made some great connections. And, like my relationship with Kirkman came about because I was his editor at Marvel, for instance. Howard Chaykin too. I edited him there, and we're still very, very close. And so I got a lot out of it, but, I kind of realized while I was at Marvel that I was a bad editor, and I was never going to be a good editor because I wanted too much control. And I did, when scripts would come in and they weren't how I would do it, I had a hard time separating out, my job isn't to make what I would want. My job is to facilitate the team that has been selected making their version of this thing. And the problem with that is oftentimes I didn't particularly like their version of the thing. I'm picky. I have very specific tastes. And I was very young. It was my early 20s, and I was kind of a bull in the china shop. And because I wanted things to be good. I wanted things to be great, and I wanted them to match up to my high expectations for the medium. And, when your work is part of a larger publishing plan for a big company that has, higher level concerns, that, do or die, it's got to be great no matter what, by any means necessary approach isn't really best placed. Like that's not really the best way to go about doing things.
Top priority kind of thing.
So yeah, no, like, I mean, I'm proud of the work I did there, and I learned a lot, but I learned very early on that, the biggest impact. So, I mean, the moment I realized that I needed to leave, because I'm still having fun, and I loved all the people I was working with, and, you get to work on comics all day, it's a dream come true. But the moment I realized I needed to leave, I'm not going to say what book it was, but I was, because it's just too mean, but I realized that, I was never going to turn a good book into a great book. A great book's a great book, and it has to do not with editorial shoving people in towards the marginal changes that they can incentivize people to do, right? That's not where it comes from. It comes from an actual team working holistically together with a single unified vision, and they make this thing. And I was never going to be able to facilitate that. Likewise, I was never going to be able to make a bad book good, right? Because it's just bad, right? And that's the thing when you're working at a publisher, when you're an editor, publisher, you're gonna work on bad books. every like whoever you think like is like the Mount Rushmore of comic book editors, I guarantee they have edited more horrible books than you even realize, right? Just because it's a publishing schedule and they're periodicals and they got to keep coming out, right? And you're never going to make a bad book good. I realized, and I was working on one of these, the most impact I could ever have as an editor was to make an unreadable book passable. To make a book that is absolutely dreadful and irredeemably bad, and that's not a joke on Irredeemable Ant-Man. Irredeemable Ant-Man was a joy to work on. That's not the book I'm talking about. But yeah, no, there's this random terrible book that I was working on, and it was so much work. It was so much effort because every stage of it was just dreadful. Just the work being done was absolutely horrific, and it was backbreaking labor just to get everything up to snuff, to not be like visibly and self-evidently atrocious. And it still wasn't a good book. It was still a bad book. It just wasn't an embarrassment to the company, right? And I realized that was the most impact that I was ever going to have on a book, and I had to find another job. I had to leave. I had to get out of there.
Comics Beat, I know you're listening right now, confirmed. We have it here live on the Oblivion Bar. Aubrey Sitterson says Books of Doom by Ed Brubaker is horrifically bad and irredeemable. Go ahead and print that, put it in a quote.
I love that one. That was that the Pablo Ramundi Terriers?
Yes, it was. Yep.
Oh yeah. See, no, I remember. No, that was
it's great. It's great. We're just kidding. All right. Well, and you mentioned recently on your Substack, Mark Guggenheim, saying don't care as much. And I won't spoil anything in that post because I want people to go back and read that on your Substack, Atlas Still Sunk. And I want people to read that because I think it's really incredible, especially for creatives that want to, because Aaron, can you please just verbalize this? I also am a neurotic overthinker, overcarer, and it can be to a detriment, correct?
It absolutely is. It's funny because I constantly get these texts where he's like, fuck this, I'm not doing it anymore. And then like an hour later, there he is. He's like doing the thing all over again, but even harder, even more, even like with more detail. So like Chris, it's one of those things that's ingrained in both of us. I think it's a military thing, but I think it's also just a caring. There's the creative industry. There's a care that you have for the things that you put out into the world that you just cannot let something shitty go out there. Like to you, it has to be the cream of the crop.
It's yeah, brother.
Cream of the crop.
Well, and speaking of cream of the crop, Aubrey, our real first question had to do with wrestling.
Okay.
Because naturally it had to, right? Because you wrote the comic book story, the comic book story of professional wrestling. And this is something, and we have a mutual friend, Jim Viscardi, also self-proclaimed huge wrestling fan. We talked about this during our conversation. Daniel Moore Johnson, also a huge wrestling fan as well. We've talked to him about it. So I have to ask you, and this is like, I want this to sort of like be a reoccurring thing. And I know as a wrestling fan, you're probably going to find this really annoying, but what's your favorite, or who is your favorite obscure Attitude Era wrestler and why?
Oh, I mean, like how obscure do we have to get? I mean, like obscure for like wrestling fans or obscure for normal people?
I would say normies, like Aaron and I would consider us normies. Like we like the Attitude Era, like, Stone Cold, The Rock, I like Chris Jericho is my favorite wrestler from that era. If that means anything,
Chris
but
Jericho's
I'm probably Attitude Era, by the way.
I tell people that so I'm answering a different question first.
Please,
I tell people that my favorite wrestler of all time is Ric Flair. And I academically do believe that he is the greatest professional wrestler of all time, right? No contest. However, if I'm being honest, my favorite wrestler is Chris Jericho. My favorite.
Oh yeah, Y2J baby. Thank you, Aubrey.
He's not obscure.
Validation.
Chris Jericho's not obscure, so that doesn't answer your question. I think like this is not obscure for wrestling fans, but I think for normies, this is pretty obscure. It's hard in 2025, it's really hard to convey to people how outrageously over Val Venus was during the Attitude.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Monstrously over. And for people who aren't familiar, he had a porn star gimmick. That's it. He had a porn star gimmick. He had long, wet hair, and he came out in a towel, and he would take it off, and he would swing it around. And he was just everything was oversexed and ridiculous. And the Attitude Era crowd ate it up, man. They went absolutely nutso for it. He was so over. And and also I think a better worker than he got credit for too, because it was kind of subsumed into the gimmick and that's all anybody thought about.
Did he have a diva with him at one point as well during the shows? I can't remember exactly.
He did a few. I'm bad. I did that. I read a whole book about professional wrestling. I was like, perfect. I can forget all this stuff now. So I got like all the dates and the specifics went immediately out my ears once that book came out. Yeah, there he is. Look at him.
Yeah. Look how just luscious and oiled up and in a towel. Like that's
the audience
right
can't
there.
see this, but Chris has pulled up a picture of a man in knee pads and a towel wrapped around his waist.
He has trunks on too. You just can't see it.
You just can't see them.
Purposely.
So me personally, I just imagine they're not there.
Sure.
So, and he's got he's just like doing like hip thrusts. I'm assuming.
Yeah,
that's how my brain works.
Weird gyration in the middle of the rink, right?
The big Valowski.
Yes. Yeah.
I gotta always say, like, one of my favorites, like at least probably more obscure these days because he's just faded into the darkness. Dustin Rhodes as Gold Dust.
Okay,
and he's also multiple different versions of that too, right?
Yes. I mean, what wrestler did not have multiple versions of either themselves or their character? Like Mick Foley.
Yeah,
sure. That guy is first off, Mick Foley is a total sweetheart. Sweetheart.
Yeah.
Met him several months ago in New Jersey. Great guy. But yeah, most wrestlers have like multiple iterations of their character. Even like the Undertaker, he went through like
he was Limp Bizkit era.
It
was evil.
Badass.
Badass. I remember that WrestleMania when he came out with the motorcycle.
Keep rolling, baby.
That's right.
Well, I don't want to digress too much, but I do want to ask one question slightly, and it's not I don't think it's your typical editing question, but like it's mostly about as somebody who I don't have much of a desire to write comics, but I do want to edit them. So like I don't have like the usual track path in my brain where it's like I want to write comics to get to the next thing. My goal would be to edit comics.
Comics feed you.
Yeah, how does that, like, how does somebody really like work their way into that industry? Because I mean, I have a background in editing, as I'm sure a lot of people, obviously really care about their work, go back and edit it. But professionally, how would somebody just like kind of branch into that?
It's hard for me to say. The way I came into Marvel, I was an intern. And then I got a part-time job working there. I was an editorial assistant while I was still in college. And then when I graduated, I lucked out and a spot was opening up and I was able to slide right into it. So it was really a timing thing as well. It's different now because comic book editing used to be a New York-based profession. Marvel and DC were there, and and depending on what year you're looking at, some other publishers bouncing around too. But now it's all over the place, and a lot of folks work remotely too. And I'm in LA now, and there's a ton of. I think there's probably more comics editorial in LA than there is in New York at this point. You've got DC and Boom and some of the stuff that I'm not remembering too. But
Seattle too kind of has like a big comic.
I'm sorry,
footprint. Seattle as well kind of has a huge comic footprint as well, right?
Maybe and Portland has a bunch of people as well.
Portland, maybe, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like folks are spread out all over the place now. So yeah, I don't know. I couldn't really give any practical advice on how to break into it. It's a difficult field in that it's a necessary role, but it is a underappreciated role, and margins in comics are so slim regardless that there's not a whole lot of money in it either. What I can say is from the perspective of, I can't tell you how to get a job as a comic book editor, but I can tell you some things that I think would make you stand out as a comic book editor, as a candidate, right? Almost all comic book editors, right? Like the vast majority come to comics from a writing /English /liberal arts background. And there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. That's how I came to comics too. But you're only getting part of the equation, and if you're a good comic book editor, you're capable of giving notes on everything. You're capable of casting every part of a book, not just based on who has the most social media followers and is up in your DMs, or who is like trending right now, or whatever other spurious reasons people use to make casting decisions. But, good comic book editors are able to extrapolate out what the book is going to look like. It's like being a baseball manager or something, right? You put your team together and then you need to help them play. right? Look
Right.
at that. Sports analogies.
That's right.
I'm impressed by myself right now. So
he is glowing.
But, I think that the piece that a lot of comic book editors, and this included me as well, and folks I worked with and folks who I just interact with throughout the industry, is they don't have that art background. They don't have a design background. And anything that you can do to get your reps in and build capability in those areas would be a massive differentiator for a person trying to break into editorial, because it's just not something with, and I think it's borne out in the types of work, broadly speaking, the type of work that gets published. Most comics are primarily a narrative. And that's because most editors, that's the extent to which they can engage with comics, right? So if you're an editor who only really has writing and liberal arts and English type background, and you want to have an impact on the book, which everybody does, because we like to think that the ways we spend our day are valuable and useful, you're going to be spending time giving notes on, the 3-act structure and the character arcs, and this is a static character, and what about the themes here and the metaphor, and like, that's all fine and good, and stories need that stuff too. But in my opinion, focusing solely on that, and then settling on that, and then deciding, okay, well, now who's going to draw it? That's backwards. I think that, this is not a controversial opinion, it's just a factual thing. Comics are a visual medium, and approaching it as strictly the format through which you're going to tell a story is wrong. And it makes for bad assembly line comics, is what it makes for. I think comics desperately needs more editors with backgrounds in art. And they don't have to be accomplished artists of themselves, but they need to at least understand and how to discuss art and differentiate between different types of artists. And I think design too. Editors should have a good design sense, and that's going to help them weigh in on things like page layout and page design and lettering placements. I think editors should have rudimentary understandings of color theory, which I think is exceedingly rare. I think, I don't know, to look at most books on the rack, most colorists don't have a rudimentary understanding of color theory.
Shots fired.
No, I mean, it's true. I mean, like, a lot of colorists in the present environment learned from YouTube videos, and you can tell, not because there's something wrong with learning from YouTube videos, but because YouTube videos are generally geared toward teaching people how to color for things that will be on a screen, which is to say depicted with illuminated light instead of reflected light. And if you're coloring for RGB and not considering CMYK, which is how everything is printed, you end up with a muddy mess. Things don't look good, And so I think these are things that, like, an editor should be able to get colors in and open it up in Photoshop or their equivalent and poke around in it, be able to determine whether it's going to print well or not. And I think it's a distressingly few amount of editors who can actually do that.
That is the single best answer and description and definition.
My answer was you just need to learn like 8 other jobs. But that was the advice I gave you, Aaron.
But honestly, like, if that's the answer, that's the answer. And honestly, it fits the bill, and I appreciate that, because it's candid and it makes so much sense, because I think you're absolutely right. When you go into anything as an editor with a background in writing, whether it's editing somebody else's article or somebody else's book or something, like, you have to have an idea of what the bigger picture is. And if you can't use your visually creative portion of your brain to adapt that in real time to what you're editing, all you're doing is editing words and basic content. You're not creating you're not helping create this universe. And it's so funny when you talk about like the colors and things like that, because I immediately think back to No One Left to Fight, and I'm just thinking about how much of an amazing color scheme all of that all of those books were. So like, I'm just excited to continue this conversation into more of what you've created, because I see where your thoughts go into your work, and I appreciate your answer even more so.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And I think that's the big thing that I bring with me from my time in Marvel editorial specifically, because I think not all editorial jobs are the same, right? If you're working at Marvel or DC editorial, you typically have a much larger role in whatever book you're working on than if you were working as, especially like if you got hired by some, like when I was working for Kirkman and Mark Miller and John Romita Jr. and Mark Guggenheim, they didn't want me giving notes on anything. They wanted me to help them get the pages in and make sure there were no problems and get things off to the publisher and all that stuff, So yeah, not every editorial job is the same degree of both these things, but every comic book job consists of both traffic cop, making sure things get in on time, and quality control, making sure that's good when it gets there. And yeah, if you're not a generalist, if you're not capable of weighing in on all that stuff, I think it's very hard. It's exceedingly difficult to do that. I do work with Archie Comics sometimes, and I love working with Archie Comics. And one of the coolest things about working with Archie Comics is that they have an editor and they have an art director on every book. And they work very close. It's Jamie Rotante is the editor, and then Vin Lavallo is the art director on everything. And they work extremely closely together, but Vin, as an artist himself, is able to give notes efficiently and with a clarity and confidence that, someone who doesn't have an art background can struggle to hit, I think.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into what we kind of brought you here for was, discussing Free Planet as well as some other stuff that we're very excited to talk about. Can you please tell the listeners about your 2021 Kickstarter campaigns for both Stoned Master and Beef Bros?
Beef Bros. Yeah, man. So pandemic hit, and I was already speaking with Tyrell Cannon, artist of The Schlub at Image Comics and Eris, which by the time this goes live, his latest Eris campaign will be running on Kickstarter. Go find it, ERIS. I've read the 3rd issue. It's amazing. But I was already talking to him about doing Beef Bros. Beef Bros, Terrell and I love superheroes. We love 90s Image excess. We love 80s like big muscly manga, like seinen manga specifically. I had to search for the term. And we kind of stirred all those things up into the mix with the idea of making throwback superheroes as they were originally ideated in the 1940s, which is to say populist and looking out for the little guy. And, the result was Beef Bros, right? So it's drenched in neon. It is it's late 80s, early 90s bodybuilder, pro wrestler aesthetics. They are unitards. They are not terribly bright young men, Ajax and Huey Beef. They are brothers, and they love each other, and they live their life by a really simple but powerful idea, which is that if you can help somebody out, you do it. And also, they're the strongest dudes. They are just so incredibly strong. They're just the strongest guys around. And that mindset dropped into, something approaching the real world, gets them into trouble. And that's the story of Beef Bros, the first campaign. And it did gangbusters, man. Yeah. So we were already working on it when the pandemic hit. And when everything went pencils down, Tyrell had run Kickstarters before. I had always been scared of doing it just because it's so much to keep track of and so many different variables. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without Tyrell's experience and wisdom guiding us on it. But yeah, no, it did gangbusters. And so I followed it up with Stoned Master, which is it's exactly what it sounds like. It's Drunken Master, but set in a Los Angeles dispensary. So it's kind of it's like a stoner kung fu comedy. I don't know, think like Pineapple Express meets Cheech and Chong, right? That's not bad. Pineapple Express meets meets Drunken Master, right? That's a better one. But yeah, no, there it is. And that was with Chris Moreno, who I'd previously worked with on the comic book story of professional wrestling. And Chris and I are big fans of Kung Fu movies and Cheech and Chong movies. And so it was a really fun project for us to work on. And then within like 18 months, I think, I did my third Kickstarter, which was Beef Bros Behind Bars. And it was Huey and Ajax. They were back, but this time they were tossed into a massive multi-story prison owned and operated by the world's biggest media conglomerate. So it's all branded with their iconic character, Gilby Gopher. And yeah, that stuff was a blast to work on and really fun to do stuff in, a little bit longer format, but also just kind of one and done in a way that the normal comic book shop market isn't really conducive toward, just because of the way it's structured. But no, it was a blast, and it was really, really gratifying too, because, Beef Bros and Stone Master, for different reasons, are books that would not work in the direct market. Beef Bros, despite the fact that superheroes are massively popular in the direct market, generally speaking, outliers like Invincible aside, which also has its own TV show now, if people want superheroes, they're generally going to be getting Spider-Man or Batman, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they're going to be getting the ones that they can see on TV and they know of already. So Beef Bros would have been a tough sell there. And Stone Master would have been a tough sell. I live in California, so I forget that just huge cannabis leaves on the cover of comic books are like kind of a non-starter for a big swaths of the country. I forget about that from the privileged position of Southern California that I currently sit in. So yeah, that would have been a difficult thing to really make a go of in the direct market. So being able to go directly to consumers with those was a treat.
Yeah, Aubrey, one of the things I really appreciate about your work and just the things I know about your career thus far, and I'm assuming you're going to continue to sort of, continue on going forward, is like you're very interested in just telling your story, and also sort of like, and I mean this sort of, very respectfully, is you're interested in pressing the boundaries. You want to almost like find the boundary and maybe take a toe over it, or even in the case of Free Planet, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, just taking a full leap over that boundary and sort of traversing many different elements that are off, like these essential rules that have been put in place since like the 40s.
Yeah, well, I think that I appreciate that, and I do take it as a compliment, man, because I think the fact of the matter is there is a lot of received wisdom in comics about how comics should work and how they need to work, and a lot of that stuff, it's one of two things, right? It's either fashion, which is to say it can shift with the drop of a hat, like just the style in which we do comics. And it's either fashion, right? Which is to say it's not really a rule. It's just what's been popular for the past 2 decades. Or it's a very limited, blinkered, I would even say, approach and view of what comics can accomplish, right? And I think it's tied up in what I was talking about before, which is the fact that for almost the entirety of comics existence, almost the entirety of comics publishing has been treated like an assembly line. And when you're doing books like that, when you're viewing writing and penciling and inking and coloring and lettering as all distinct tasks, right? It's just like an assembly line. When you're looking at it that way, you're really limited in the approach that you can do, especially if you want things to move smoothly and come out on time. That's why writers break down, like they come up with a story and then they break it into 5 issues and then they break that into 20 pages. And then they say, okay, well, each page can have 4.5 panels and, and they break it down to that. And that is a really good way to make sure that scripts can be easily passed off to an artist and drawn to a reliable minimum level of quality. It's not how you make interesting work, I don't think. It's not how you push the boundaries of what comics can do. It's not how you utilize the form to its utmost, is what I've always wanted to do. And because I think that comics is such a special, fantastic medium, but what's most fascinating to me about it is I think we've barely scratched the surface of what comics can do, because the unfortunate publishing realities like of the industry that's around comics and its requirements there. And also, you know, comics since the inception of film, right? Comics has been trying to keep up. Comics has been trying to be film for as long as film has been an issue, as long as since film supplanted comics as like the primary mass entertainment medium. And comics has been trying to catch up and has been always thought about, you know, things are always in terms of like, oh, well, it's like a film with a unlimited special effects budget, or it's, you know, it's like all these films that are all connected. But, you know, that's not comics' true strength. Showing how comics can do things slightly better than another visual medium isn't the strength of comics. The strength of comics is page design, is layout, is thinking about all of these disciplines that we were just talking about holistically and together, and not treating it just like, you know, cogs in an assembly line. And I forgot what the question was. I'm just babbling about comics now. It happens. It's a salient risk of having me on your podcast.
No, we love it. We love a long-winded response for sure.
Yeah, no, I love the fact that, I mean, you're right, because like, as again, out of everybody in this group, and which is the constant same thing, and Chris, we make a bit of this, is like I'm the newest one in almost in every room to reading comics, and so I like that approach because I like that philosophy, because not every comic needs to be a cog in the eventual like storyline. That's the convergence, the crossover, the big story arc. Like every comic issue has an opportunity to be a swing in a storyline. It has an opportunity to be something immense and another door that opens into something greater. And I get really tired of like filler issues of comics that don't really get you anywhere just because they want to put out another issue, or they want to fulfill like a 10 issue story arc.
I'll tell you what I get tired of, Aaron. I get tired of filler pages. Right. And I'm not talking about like pages where nothing happens, because that's like a hard thing to qualify, like what that means. People are like, oh, nothing happened this issue. It's like, well, I mean, obviously something happened. But what I'm talking about are connective tissue pages that are unavoidable when you take the approach that, you know, I was just running down, which is to say you come up with your story. Right. And like you might have specific, you know, so you have your story, your plot for your 20-page comic, and, you know, you've got splash pages and a spread here, and then everything else, you just need to move the pieces into place, which means that sometimes you've just got a 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 panel grid, just moving things around so that you can get to the spread in a page or two. That, my friends, is fucking boring. That sucks, right? Comics are expensive. $4 for 20 pages, right? Every single one of those needs to have value, and not just value in terms of narrative value. Again, that shit's boring. And if people want a compelling visual story, watch a movie. If people want a rich, complex plot, read a novel, right? Comics gives you something different, right? And what comics can give you that these other mediums cannot is the presentation of a page that is so magnificent that you, as a reader, choose to spend additional time with it. Right? Yeah, you're watching a movie, like, unless you're a crazy person, you don't pause it every time there's a nice shot to just stare at. And maybe you do because you're like a cinematography person, which I clearly find very strange. But maybe you do that. But like, there's only so much you're going to get out of it. You can look at the composition and then you got it. You're there. But with comics, with a well-constructed spread, I mean, think about like, I don't know. Working on Free Planet, I thought a lot about the way I felt about Dinotopia books when I was a kid. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
Still have mine.
They're amazing. They're so cool. I got some from the library when I was working on Free Planet, just because I wanted to go through them all. Or like Wayne Barlow does these guides of like this made up planet, and it's just like all this like data and charts and drawings of these.
I don't think I've seen those. I'll look it up.
They're really neat. But yeah, like I thought a lot about that in terms of like, why aren't more comics like that? Why? And it's, you know, it's a trend, right? Because for the past 20 years, we've leaned into teleplay pacing, right? Everything is written like it's an episode of a streaming TV show. And we've leaned into decompression, right? Which works really great if you're reading big chunky manga volumes and you've got 200 pages of it, you can just burn through it. But again, paying $4 for 20 pages of comics where the degree, like the amount of hours, especially on a book like Free Planet, the work that Jed is doing is enormous, right? With an outrageous amount of detail. Why aren't more comics structured in such a way that readers want to slow down and want to spend some time just taking a page in? And yeah, man, I think that was a big inspiration on how we approached Free Planet and how we did things differently, is making sure that there is no connective tissue. There are no filler pages. There's certainly no filler issues. It is packed to the gills with stuff for readers to enjoy and take their time with and reread and maybe like come back to again later if they need to brush up on something. It's a different type of book in a very real way, I think.
I absolutely agree. And I think that's a wonderful transition into our next question, which is, let's talk about Free Planet, which comes out on May 7th. When's FOC for Free Planet? I couldn't find that online.
14th.
April 14th. Okay.
Yes,
so
sir.
as everyone is listening to this conversation, this episode will already be out. So make sure you guys call your local comic shop and order that first issue. But let's talk about the book itself, which is both sort of this research-driven space opera about the days following the end of a revolutionary war of the first Free Planet, but also more as like a reader, a pretty challenging and somewhat confrontational restructuring, I think, as we talked about earlier, of the medium. So a lot of questions here I had when reading this first issue.
I love it. I love having my work described as confrontational. By the way.
Confrontational again.
No, I'm going to own that. Of course, I'm confrontational. Yeah, the work is too.
Confrontational in the way that, like, when someone asks you how you look before you all go out, you go, I go with the green shirt instead of the blue shirt. Like you're helping them in the end, but it's going to cause a fight eventually somewhere.
Does this make my ass look fat?
Exactly. Yeah. So
no, your ass does.
Your ass is just fat, Aaron. That's what we say here. But
it's what I like. It's what I like about him. Honestly.
Yeah, it's my second favorite thing. His green eyes.
Don't say the first. Let people wonder.
Yeah, we're just gonna let them wonder on that.
My eyes are brown, Dick.
Oh, sorry. I never look. I'm always looking at your ass. Anyway, point being is that a lot of questions came up when reading this first issue. Yeah. Obviously there's a lot of questions about the story, but also the process, which I kind of want to key in on in this conversation. Then maybe down the road we can get you back on to have like a spoilery conversation about maybe the first trade. Maybe even have Jed on the show as well. But the process, the research, the design, everything that went into this project, it's on the page. We can see it evidently. So let's start with a very simple, broad question. How did it feel, in terms of like getting with Jed, your artist, Jed Daugherty, your artist on the series? How did it, why did you guys feel compelled to tell this story the way that you did? As we said earlier, again, a lot of research, a lot of design, very dense, this first issue. Why did you guys feel compelled to tell it in this particular way?
You mentioned earlier I had that big year in 2020, 2021 with all the Kickstarter stuff. And then right after, or even in the midst of some of that too, I had 3 different Dark Horse limited series out that year. It was Savage Hearts with Jed. It was The Worst Dudes with Tony Gregori. And it was No One Left to Fight 2 with Fico Ossio. And I had a ton of work out there. And I had big aspirations. I've been at this for a minute, man, and I had big expectations. It felt like everything was paying off. Everything was finally hitting, right? And I've been slogging at stuff for a really long time with some very like notable and some of them very public setbacks. And I had gotten to a point where I had this slate of books from a major publisher, and I had this Kickstarter kind of enterprise that was up and running. And I really thought I was on my way, but nothing came of it. And some of that is, timing, just in terms of those books came out when every publisher was dumping books into the market because they had that pencils down period around COVID. And,
sure.
I think that there's likely some, my failure to pick up kind of like larger institutional buy-in probably has something to do with stuff I was alluding to earlier, and kind of my approach as an editor previously, or like perceptions of me as a former editor, or any number of other things. And this is kind of the key part, man. I can't control any of that. Mm-hmm. All of that's outside of my control. But I realized that what is under my control is the type of work that I'm doing. And I had like a real come to Jesus meeting with myself about it, right? And the type of work I was doing. And I'm proud of the work, all the work that we mentioned and all the co-creators I worked with. I think it's great stuff and I adore it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'm not ashamed of it, to be sure. But I was still making work with an eye toward making the type of work that the industry rewards and seems to focus on, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted to be a working comic book creator. And I thought that in order to do that, I need to make these types of books and I need to make them fast. And I needed to, and that's why I did so many of them, right? Just because this you have to do, right? You have to have 3 or 4 books out. You have to write 3 or 4 books at least, more if you're trying to get your creator own stuff up and running, which you should if you're smart, right? And I realized that, I wasn't able to do my best work that way. And I don't think anybody is, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. I think that you can find modes to work in that do work and people like the work I did. It's not that people hated this stuff, but I didn't think it was the best work that I could be doing. And that is something under my control. And that is something that I could change. And I made a conscious effort to slow down and to rethink how I was approaching the page. And quite frankly, boys, I've been at this for long enough. I've worked really hard to get to the point where I can have an ongoing image series launching, right? And this was always the dream for me, right? Having an image series and hopefully a long running one, knock on wood, right? That was always the goal for me. That's what I wanted to build to. But if this thing doesn't hit, I don't, realistically speaking, this is not me being sad sack. This is me being realistic. I don't know how many other chances I get, right? Mm. If this doesn't hit, I don't think Eric Stevenson's going to be like, all right, so let's give it a go. What else you got? What else you got in the bag over there, right? And because it's just not how comics work. It's not how any business works, right? Sure. And I wanted to make sure that if nothing else, Free Planet was unadulterated fire hose blast Aubrey, right? I want it to be everything. I want it to be everything Jed and I are interested in. Jed's a co-creator on this. And we talked about it extensively about doing something new, doing something more rigorous, doing something more complex. I met Jed when he was working as an assistant for Howard Chaykin, and that Chaykinian approach to the page, really centering design as and the layout of the page as the foundational storytelling unit of comics. That's a chicken thing. And that's something that both Jed and I buy into. And, the aspiration was there already, right? I had a conversation, and this is another thing that I could control too. During the pandemic, I talked with Kirkman, and he asked me, he was just talking to me about stuff I had coming up. And this was prior to Savage Hearts and Worst Dudes were in some progress of completion, but they weren't out yet. And he was asking me what I had coming out. And I was telling him about those. I was like, well, I've got a sword and sorcery romantic comedy with a big buff lady and the weird little beast man. And then I have this very strange, vulgar, Chandler-esque detective story in space with a big pink cat man. And he was like, man, do you ever just do a story about a guy who has a horse and then the horse dies? And I said, how many legs does the horse have on it? And I made a joke, but his point was well taken. My work is Trey, right? It's gonzo, it's weird. And a big part of that is because it's comics. And I feel let's use that. And I want everything to be visually, and I want everything on the page to be visually compelling, right? And it's part and parcel with that approach I was talking about earlier in terms of giving people something to chew on and incentivize them to spend time with the page. And I think one of the ways you do that is make everything interesting. And if the coloring is dull and monochromatic and all the characters look the same and they're all dressed like it's the real world, that's less interesting to me to look at on like just a very like objective level. And I've always wanted to lean into that. But the downside of that is I think that there has been a perception of me and my work that it is slight, that it is, you know, there's y'all like this as wrestling fans. There's a wrestling saying it's funny ain't money. Right.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I think that's true in comics too. Things that read as self-evidently funny are written off as silly and not serious and not deserving of serious engagement and consideration. And that rubbed me the wrong way because I've always thought that I've always brought an intellectual rigor to my work, even when it's, you know, blowjob jokes in The Worst Dudes, right? Like it's still structured, you know, that book was structured. The Worst Dudes was structured like a Chandler-esque detective story. It's complex, it's messy and weird and difficult to keep up with. And that's part of the appeal. It's how these things work. And everything I've done has had that degree of thought put into it because of the way we presented it, because of how many jokes there were, because of the outre elements. I think that people have kind of looked down their noses at it a little bit, and it started to really stick in my craw. I started to get real resentful about the fact that I would look around and see writers celebrated for being these like smart, cerebral writers, and I wanted that. And so Free Planet is it's really it's a I'll show you book, man. If
you feel that,
if what you people want is smart, challenging, complex work that actually uses the medium, all right, let's go. Let's do it. And it's a dick ton of work. It's an outrageous amount of work. You know, you mentioned the research that goes into it. Stacks. I've got one right here that I'm rereading, and like they're all this thick. They're all like this, right? This is the Spanish Civil War.
It's definitely 1,000. It's 1,000 pages easily, right there.
At least it's like 1,100 or 1,200. Yeah, and like you know this. I did Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution. I read another like 1,200 one about Cuba. Just I've gone through Plato's Republic a couple times for this.
With leisurely war reading. College. Yeah.
Yeah, dude, that's the thing. Yeah, like I mean, because I wanted this world to feel real and to feel lived in. And, you know, it's about very real topical stuff, I think, not because of I plan it to be topical, but because this stuff is always topical, right? In a big, messy, interconnected world like the one we live in. And I wanted the freedom to engage with that and explore it and sit down in it and think about it without, you know, if this was historical fiction, people would come into it with their ideas already cemented in. But by abstracting it out to sci-fi, we have a lot more freedom to kind of let people discover how they feel about things, but it still needs to feel real. So, you know, research on my end, design work on Jed's end, extensive design work from him, just absurd stuff, just making sure that every ethnicity has their own clothing style, and every planet and confederation of planets have their own types of weapons, and they generate power from different places, which impacts what their ships look like, which impacts how their ships travel and what types of weapons and vehicles and such that they use. And then that has impact on the story. And it was working on it was very much a game of one-upsmanship with Jed and I, right? Because this is a story I've told other places, but when we were working on Savage Hearts, which is set in a big old jungle full of dinosaurs, Jed called me one day and said, "Hey, what is the flora like?" I said, "The flora?" He said, "I like plants." I was like, "I know what it means, but like I don't fucking know, man. I have no idea." And he shamed me. I felt bad. I felt like I was slacking, right? Because and to be frank, I was, right? And this is the type of stuff that writers slack on all the time. You know, like we just think, oh, the artist will figure that out. The artist will do that, right? And this is a very filmic approach, right? Because if you're writing screenplays, it doesn't fucking matter what, like, unless it's a plot point, it doesn't matter what types of plants there are in the background. Let the production design, like the set design people will figure that out. But in comics, you have the freedom to actually weigh in on this stuff and make it a substantive part of the story. And that's what we do with Free Planet, right? Like nothing is incidental, nothing is random, and everything has impact on everything else because it is this big, fully fleshed out world.
Sure. Well, good, because I have way more questions for you, but unfortunately, we got to get to the next one because like we don't want to take too much of your time.
Can we make a quick pack, Aaron, before you go on to this next one? That like at some point down the road, because we told you we'd keep you for about an hour, we want to stay somewhat true to that. We need to get you back because there's so much. Deal. I feel like just in that response there, I have 4 or 5 questions that we could get to eventually, and I'll just pack those away. And let's get you and Jed on the show down the road once this thing is in like a collected form, and we can just dig into that. But yeah, Aaron, go ahead, because I do want to hear this next one.
Yeah. So recently in an Instagram post, this book you posted that this book is purposely designed and structured to be dense and use up as much visual space, kind of as we talked about over in this conversation, to be studied, examined. You even mentioned that this approach was purposely hostile towards digital reading, which luckily for Chris and I, that's how we read it.
We read it digitally.
Sorry, boys.
And then you also wrote a newsletter.
On May 7th, you're going to love it.
We're going to love it.
You recently wrote in a newsletter also, creating something purely your own, beholden to no one, is a joyous and triumphant assertion of autonomy, which reminds me of something we had Patrick Horvath on recently, he's a good friend of the show. We love him. And he said, basically, he was like, to kind of round up his quote, he was like, do the weird thing, do the weird thing. But we want you to tell us a little bit about your process with Jed and designer Mark Kaufman in structuring this book the way you did, and why you felt it was so important for this first issue to be read like physically, tangibly in a book in your hands.
Yeah. So I'll answer the part about the designer first, right? So Mark is brilliant. Mark he did our cover treat, like front and back cover treatment, the inside front cover, like the title page, and also the back matter. The book has back matter in every issue. They're essays with brand new. So they're essays, but they're written by the character, Dr. Aldous Foyroshi, who writes all of the big chunky historical captions leading throughout the book, which kind of serve as the through line through all these anecdotal scenes. Mark designed the back matter as well. And we worked together with Mark to hammer out a approach for the covers before Jed had drawn anything, right? And I think that's another example of kind of this holistic approach that I'm talking about, right? Another one is that Taylor, our letterer, he doesn't get going until the colors are done, which is unusual. Most of the time, comics just have the color and letterer working separately, and then they smash the files together and fix any problems on the back end. And that's not good enough for me, right? Because I want what Taylor's doing to be not just adjusted after the fact to fit in with the colors, but I want him to be making conscious choices in consideration of the colors. And the same is true for Jed and his cover design, right? And so we really wanted something distinct, something that read that, Mark is he's a cartoonist, and he used to be the designer for the Nib, run by my buddy Matt Bors. And so he's very much of comics, or he knows comics without being of comics, right? He's not like a direct market comics guy. And we wanted something that looks different and distinct and serious, right? And that's what I went to him with, and he came back with that kind of big chunky planetoid design with the cutout letters and kind of like oddly spaced on 3 lines and all. And I adore it. And then it was off to Jed for him to do a cover that fits in the bottom around that design, right? So that was working with Mark. In terms of working with Jed, the primary difference, and it's impacted everything about how I write, and it's something I started doing with my Archie work, both with Jed and with Megan Hutchison on Archie Judgment Day, and it's doing thumbnails.
You mentioned this in your Substack.
Yeah, I do thumbnails now, but crucially, I don't do them So I used to do thumbnails on kind of an ad hoc basis, right? If there's a page that I wrote and I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work, or let me just make sure this is going to fit on the page the way I want it to, I would kind of sketch it out and make sure. But that's only sufficient for addressing problems.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't help you break out of this thing that I was talking about earlier, which was me falling into the same trap that everybody does. I had, look at any of my books, and there are plenty of pages where it's just 4 or 5 panels of people moving things around, of us moving the story pieces around. And sometimes there's some good dialogue, and, they're always drawn really well because I work with really good artists, but it's not fulfilling comics. I don't think it's not comics.
Aubrey, I have a pretty intense Fighterverse fan in the chat here that might say differently. He mentioned earlier before the show that he was like, "Oh, we need to talk about the Fighterverse, but based on the Free Planet conversation, it's hard to fit it in."
Not. So he's talking about No One Left to Fight. We call it the
Fighterverse. Yeah.
And we, that work is wonderful, and I love it, and it's a blast. But it is not approached in the same way that Free Planet is, right? No One Left to Fight is primarily a grinding fight soap opera, right? So while we do build to these big moments that you really want to live in, a lot of the book, you move through it at a much brisker pace. There's way less dialogue. Like there's no caption. No One Left to Fight. There's 0 captions. And there's not even a whole lot of dialogue. There's a lot of quiet panels because it is something that you're meant to move through quickly until you get to that big, bam-balam blast or whatever, like the big crazy attack that's going on. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's not anything I'm ashamed of, but it just simply doesn't utilize the comics medium to the full degree of what it's capable of. And doing thumbnails, what I do now is I do them before I script. So I know what's going to be in an issue, but then I sit down and I thumbnail everything out like these. And that prevents me from having filler pages and connective tissue, because every time I think about a spread, I think, how is this going to be visually overwhelming? What can we do different? How can we use this space? How can we pack this in with as much content as humanly possible, such that people really want to curl up with this thing and live in it the way I did with Dinotopia books as a kid? And that approach, doing thumbnails ahead of time, I don't send them to Jed. They are not for him to follow because he's better at this than I am, right? And he comes up with better stuff than I do anyways, oftentimes. But it forces me to think about things primarily as a design problem as opposed to just a plot problem, which is how a lot of writers, myself included, it's easy to fall into that trap when you're just writing a script.
Yeah. Whew. Okay. Aubrey, as we said a minute ago, I just have so many things just sprouting off right now, and I need to hold it in. This is an exercise in restraint here. Everyone listening right now, we're using this moment to grow. And Aubrey, I'm going to ask you one last question, in order to avoid that. So, final question, and this is something we like to ask everybody, because I feel like we have so many things.
Such a blunt ending.
I know it's tough. I hate doing this, Aubrey, and we talked about this before the recording.
I talk too much. I go long-winded. It's on me. We want that. I only answered 3 questions.
We want that. We want you to really dive into it. Yeah. Honestly, that's why you're here. But it's us too. We have so many things that we want to discuss. And if anything, it just adds credence to the value of Free Planet and what it's doing for the medium. I cannot implore people enough to check it out, because of how much it's igniting these questions and sort of thoughts on this series just in the first issue.
The way that you described it about going back and re-reviewing it and kind of going panel by panel by panel, cover to cover. I've found myself doing this since I first started reading it. Again, I have multiple questions. I'm going to try and hopefully get some answers out of you once the interview conclues.
You should send them to Dr. Aldous Foyroshi, man. That's what the letters page is going to be for people who don't.
Okay,
there is an email for letters in the back, but it's not meant for, oh, Aubrey, you're so great. I mean, I appreciate that, but we're not going to run them. It's meant for specific granular questions about that world. Because I guarantee you, I have volumes of documentation on this thing. I can answer all your questions about the world, but yeah, send them to the book, man.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So before we let you go, though, we just like to ask everybody, again, very, very basic question. Is there something that you've really been enjoying recently that you want to sort of showcase here at the end of the show? Something that either inspired you from Free Planet, or just honestly anything that you're really, really loving? A movie, a comic, a podcast, an album, whatever.
So, can I say two things?
Please, as many as you want. Sure.
No.
One, how dare you? So one of them is Spectrum by Rick Quinn and Dave Chisholm.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It's so good. It's coming out from is that Mad Cave? It's Mad Cave.
Mad Cave, yeah.
Mad Cave. Yeah, it's great. It's it honestly, I'm not even gonna talk about what it's about because it doesn't matter what it's about. It's the execution that's so, and it's not that it's interesting. It's the execution that's so interesting about it. It's very much a fellow traveler of Free Planet. I've talked to Dave about it actually, like in terms of its use of the comics medium and its willingness to shift modes and say, nope, we're going to show you something different now. And we're just going to have this like entirely different narrative drawn and colored completely differently. And it's up to you, the reader, to figure out the thematic connection. I think that is beautiful. And I think that it's a thing that all good literature does, but happens so rarely in comics. And it's really inspiring to see them do it in Spectrum. Spectrum is really fantastic. And then the other thing that I'm really excited about, I just got it today. I was at the comic book shop before I came over to you. And I met this guy at Comics Pro. His name is Jared Sams, and he does Space Negro, The Last Negro, and there's 4 of them. It's like this. It's coming out from First Comics, and it's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. Have you read it? Have you guys seen it?
No, never heard of it.
That's gonna be my next one.
It's so good. Y'all gotta have Jared on. You would love him. He lives out here. But yeah, no, it's like this, like just frenetic, gonzo, Afrofuturist sci-fi comic, and it's outrageous, and I can't wait to. I've got all 4 of them now, so I'm really stoked about it.
Well, my gosh. Okay, so
can I ask y'all a question? I know we're getting late. I'm allowed to run late. Y'all are not allowed to run late on me.
Right. If you make it happen, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's all you.
Wait, are y'all both military?
Yes. Yeah. Aaron of 20 years. I did 4. That's actually how we met. Yeah.
Very cool, man. So that's very exciting. I'm glad that y'all like Free Planet.
Yes,
I'm glad that anybody likes Free Planet. I'm especially glad that military folks like Free Planet because I did an extensive amount of research, and I mentioned history of the Russian Revolution. I read this big book about Cuba, and any successful revolution of the 20th century, the military has to be involved. Of course they do. It just doesn't work otherwise, right? You need military buy-in. And one of the things that I found most interesting of both the Russian book and the Cuba book was the complex relationship between enlisted soldiers, NCOs, and officers. And that is, for the Russian Revolution as well as the Cuban Revolution, that's the crux of it. That's really, that's when you dig down, that was the NCOs choosing to throw their weight behind the revolution. That's what makes it work, right? And that was a fascinating thing for me, and it's something that we kind of touched on a little bit in the first issue, some too. And I spoke with a lot of veterans just to get, because I'm not. And so it's something I wanted to make sure that I got right because I found it so fascinating. So the fact that y'all love it, it made my day. Thank y'all.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the offer for if you ever needed it to bounce anything off of for military wise, any kind of I was gonna say I know that in Hollywood there's a big call always for military advisors when it comes to certain films. At least if you're a quality production, you'll reach out to military and get an advisor because some of you guys don't, and it shows. What was it? Law and Order, SVU. I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out.
I 100% will. Y'all go on my list. Thank you.
And absolutely there for you.
Aubrey, also, I should say, yeah, as people who are prior military, I feel like we still have a lot of self-awareness when it comes to the sort of the cog of, I'll say, the American military system and sort of your role and the purpose of signing up and how we're the only sign-up military in the world for reasons, right? Without getting really into it, because again, we're trying not to make this thing a 2-hour long episode, but
tell me what you think about the military. Give me your thoughts on the military, if you don't. Man,
Yeah,
just quickly.
Right. How do I start here? Yeah, it's a big one. But yes, I absolutely adore what you've done in terms of the structure of not beating over the head what you're trying to say. And I think I have theories on what you're trying to say here, what you and Jed are trying to say, I should say. But at the same time, being like, there are certain characters, you have them say certain things and how characters react to what they say, where I'm like, they must have either done something previously in a battle that made them, it exposed them in some very specific way, or it's foreshadowing for how they're going to react to something down the road by something that's happening in this, restructuring of this brand new planet. But again, I want to save Aaron. What do you got?
I was just I want to say, like, I just want to kind of emphasize, we've been throwing around this term of like space opera quite a bit throughout this conversation. And even just from like the first page, like it feels there are like movie adaptations of books. There are books that are adaptations of, productions. And like, this feels like if you were to make like a space opera, like Dune, and then adapt it into a straight, like, to comic book series, like, that's what this feels like. It does feel dense, but it feels dense to the point where there's just so many different layers that you see immediately, these bits and pieces of different parts of this universe that are eventually going to culminate into some amazing, like, cataclysmic, story operatic event. And I'm again, you can keep going back to throughout the first issue, and you're going to see that continue to build even from your own perception.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's just, it's here. Thank you.
It's wild. It's wild because I keep going back to that first couple, but again, I there's so much more I'm sure to read, and I'm excited for it. And I love what this even first iteration is.
I think exactly what you're trying to say there. I'm glad that it exists. I think is the sort of the key on, that's the way that I want to sort of bookend this conversation, is that when I first looked at the first issue of this book, my first thought was, before I knew you, Aubrey, before I read a word, I'm like, whoa, this is a lot of words. This feels like it feels like a prose novel in comic form. And you sort of alluded that was like maybe a sideways inspiration, that you wanted to put as much information on the page. And it works, guys. I don't know how else to say it without spoiling anything and without continuing this conversation longer than it's already been, but like, it works. And I cannot implore people to support ventures like this. This is what comics needs, right?
Thank you. I think so. I really appreciate that, and I think that it is a ton of words on the page, and like, that's the thing we have to dance around, because dense is it's a bad word in comics.
Yeah,
right? People don't really
like thinking
about dense comics, and that density, though, it's something that I've always avoided, with one notable exception, which is the wrestling book. I did a history of professional wrestling, and it's dense as hell, because it has to be, because there's just so much nonfiction facts that we have to get in there, and no one complained. No one ever complained about how dense the wrestling book was. And, I kind of came around to the fact that the problem isn't density or big captions. The problem is big captions that aren't placed appropriately on the page, in pages that aren't built around them. Jed, when he does his layouts, balloon placements are in there. He's thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
And that's why the pages work, even though they're packed with visual information and text. And then the other thing, it's back to that, I don't know, it all just comes down to my seething resentments. But I looked
where
around.
All great art comes from,
Yeah, right. It's just bile. Bile is a powerful motivator, man. But no, I looked around at books that people kind of celebrated as being these smart, cerebral, like real literature comics, and almost to a one, they're just loaded up with text, And, putting aside whether it's artfully placed in or not, I identified that they typically fall in one of two camps. It's either inner monologue, the way you would find in a novel, which never really lands as well as it does in a comic, because it just feels divorced from the actual action you're seeing, or it's explanation of what you're already seeing, right? Like, it's a dark and stormy night, the clouds were gathering, but like, you can look at the panel, it's right there.
I see that.
Yeah, exactly. And so like, those are not sufficient to me. Like, those do not pass muster. And I did not want to do that, but I knew I needed to find something to both slow people down and also to show that I'm I'm a smart. I got glasses now. I'm a smart writer too, man. And I cut my hair.
There's no lenses.
Yeah. And what I landed on was the future historian, Dr. Aldous Furoshi. And, the idea is not, you mentioned earlier, like an idea of what we're trying to say with it. And, it's less about us trying to put forth a specific idea. It's not like Beef Bros is propaganda. Free Planet's not propaganda. It's not even direct metaphor. It's an exploration and it's a rumination on this really complex stuff. And the captions play a really pivotal role in that. It's possible for someone to read the book just looking at the art and reading the dialogue, and you're still going to have a good time. You're going to get all this big military action. You're going to get all this like Claremontian interpersonal drama with people.
Mm-hmm.
What you're going to miss out on is the geopolitical context, inclusive of politics, war, religion, anthropology, philosophy, that gets covered in the captions. And why that's important is because it provides additional context for added understanding of scenes that you're reading. It sometimes provides another perspective on them, such that if you read the scene without the captions, maybe you'd have a different view on it. But you read the captions, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, the people on this planet are starving to death. That changes how I view this scene that I'm looking at. Right, I'm talking about a specific one in the first issue. Or sometimes what's discussed in the captions actively undercuts and conflicts with what the characters are doing and saying as well, right? And it's all with the idea of driving complexity, right, and ambiguity, because we set out to make something that works as literature and art object. And for my money, what those two things have in common, literature and art object, is that you need to think on them. You need to ruminate, right? It's not a direct metaphor. It's not a puzzle for you to figure out and then you get it and understand. No, it's something worth spending some time reading and rereading and thinking about. And to do that, you need ambiguity. You need to live in these kind of gray spaces. So yeah, man.
It's also very well known that in a revolution type scenario, it's very ambiguous to who is on the right side of history.
That's right.
Usually the winners tell the story, right? That's sort of
exactly
history
right.
in
winners
general.
write history.
Right.
So,
well, my gosh, Aubrey, what a great conversation. What a pleasure having you here on the show.
Man, I'm going to invite myself back if y'all don't do it. So
the third chair is yours whenever you want it. Honestly, it's such a great conversation about this incredible experiment, I'll say, in comics that I absolutely love, and I really, really, really want to succeed. Again, as I said earlier in the conversation, FOC for Free Planet #1 comes out on April 14th, and it officially releases on May 7th. So be like Aaron and I, go out, call your comic book shop right now as you're listening to this conversation, and go ahead and pre-order that first issue. So excited to see how people react to this first issue. And honestly, I believe that this is not going to be like, I don't think like a commercially easily like you're not gonna be able to advertise this book on a commercial level, I don't think. But I do believe that this is going to be a lot of people's favorite book of 2025. At the end of the year, a lot of people are going to be making their best comics of 2025. Free Planet will be on that list. I honestly firmly believe that.
I hope so, man. And I think that, I'm feeling very optimistic about it. Because it is, so I showed it to Howard Shake, my uncle Howard, and his first response was, I love it. There's no audience for this. No one will buy this. There's no one.
Thanks for that's blunt.
And he's got his own resentments and bitterness, right, from his history in comics as well. But I've been really encouraged by the conversations I've been having with not just y'all are a self-selecting sample, right? People who love comics enough to be doing podcasts about them. That's a very specific thing. You're normal. Don't worry. No judgments.
Well, it's debatable. But sure. Yeah, I get it.
It's a sliding scale. But talking to retailers, and I think that there is a appetite for something different. We've been caught up in the same kind of storytelling mode in comics for just about 20 years, right? Mm-hmm. It's decompression, it's teleplay inspired pacing, and lots of ping pong dialogue, and really a primacy of the primacy of the narrative, right? And plot and character, and all that stuff's important, but I think there's a lot more to comics, and I think people are ready for something different. I think folks are ready for something that they can chew on a little bit more. This isn't a book that you read in 5 or 10 minutes and then file away. This is something I keep talking to people and they say, I started reading it and I realized I wasn't going to have time to finish it. And so I read 3 pages each night over the course of a week or whatever, which is bonkers. Like, that's like a bonkers thing to say, like, in the context of comics as we see them now, but it doesn't have to be. And I think that, like, I know myself as a fan, I love something that I get my money's worth, man. I'm paying $4 for this thing. Let's spend some time with it and let me think on it. So I'm feeling optimistic. I think, and I'll tell you what else is inspiring optimism for me. The fact that we did, where are they?
Oh, are you going to talk about the ash cans? Because
I'm going to talk about the ash cans.
I wanted to bring it up, but yeah, my God, please tell the people about these ash cans.
So I did so because of what we're talking about, right? Like, it's a book that you have to read in print because it's big spreads. That aren't going to read digitally very well. It's lots of detail. It's graphs and charts and maps and diagrams and just absurd, all worked in, not as interstitials, but like worked into the comic page itself. And I knew that to understand y'all read the PDF, and so you're very generous, but in your understandings of this thing, but I knew, like, showing this to retailers, they need to see it. Before retailers ordered this thing, they needed to actually see what they were ordering, because just reading a PDF was not going to be sufficient. We printed up 407 of them, and I gave them out at Comics Pro, and I've been sending them to retailers that I talked to on the phone, and they're going for like $150 on eBay.
Yeah, wild. That's
which is absurd, right?
That's
for
crazy.
A guy who, Jed and I do not have, I edited at Marvel a lifetime ago, but like we're not coming off a big Batman run, right? We haven't done X-Men books. Like we don't have the pedigree of stuff that gets that kind of response, and yet people are snatching it up. So no, I'm very encouraged by it, honestly.
That's cool to hear. And I saw that while doing research for this conversation, that they were going for wild numbers on eBay. And I was like, that is very, I believe that people were excited because of that. That's really cool. So
it means something, I mean, I don't know. People get really down on the speculator market, but it is first of all, it's part of comics, and it's always been part of comics. And anybody acting like the current system would still function without speculator plays is fooling themselves. It just the math just does not check out. It's part of it, right? Is one, and two, I think it's a bellwether. Like the fact that people are that excited about it right now, I think says something about how they're going to be feeling about it in just about a month from now.
It shouldn't be the ultimate determiner for like its excitement, but I think it's a decent gauge, right? Sure. At least shows that people are excited about it for one reason or another, whatever that reason might be.
And that's why I'm excited about it.
Right. Well, Aubrey, again, thank you so much. Before we let you go, quickly, can I ask you just like, how can people follow your career? What's the best way to sort of follow everything going forward? And if there's anything else you want to sort of list here at the end.
Of course. I'm on most of the social media, and it's just my name, Aubrey Sitterson. It's really easy. I'm really easy to Google. There's only one of me. I think if you're going to do one thing, I would subscribe to my newsletter. It's Atlantis, like the sunken city, AtlantisStillSunk.com. AtlantisStillSunk.com. It goes out every week, and I've been doing deep dives into Free Planet's bibliography, all the books I've read this week. So when this goes live, there will be one up talking about process on a very specific spread from issue 1 that has not been shown anywhere yet. And we're just going to it goes step by step, talking about how it came together.
Sure. Okay. Awesome. Well, Aubrey, again, as we've said many times here, I do need to get you back on at some point.
Deal.
So whenever that might be, whether it be for the beginning of hopefully the second arc, or maybe just the collection of the trade, that would be, I think, a great time. And maybe we can even convince Jed to get on here as well.
Love it. I'm on board, boys. Cool. Thank you for having me.
All righty, everybody. There's that conversation with Aubrey Sitterson. Again, thank you, Aubrey, so much for joining us here on the Oblivion Bar podcast. I genuinely hope that everyone listening to that conversation, or that had just listened to that conversation, sees the importance of this book. We said at the beginning of the intro, we needed more time, and we will get him and Jed on the show at some point to discuss this book.
That's the most frustrating ending to a conversation, because we had so much to talk about.
Right.
And it's like we only get so much time with these creators, Luckily enough, like I said, he is such a cool.
He gave us an extra 30
dude.
minutes.
Yeah, he's such a cool, down to earth dude. He's gonna try and get Jed Doherty on here as well. So like, do your best, people. Go out there, pre-order this book, and that way, we can bring him back and we can get down deep and dirty into Free Planet.
Yeah. Again, I've said it multiple times during the episode, but FOC April 14th comes out on May 7th. So go support this book. This is the book to support everybody. And again, thank you, Aubrey, for coming on. But also, we should promote that next week on the show, Aaron, for episode 190 of the Oblivion Bar podcast. Do you know what we're doing?
No.
You have no idea what's going on?
It's definitely not Minecraft.
Battle Royale time, baby.
Fuck
Episode 6 of Battle Royale.
Baby.
Donde está el bailarín?
That's right. 5 fighters from both Aaron and I, 5 random scenarios. It's one of our favorite segments here on the Oblivion Bar podcast. We put them up against each other and we discuss who will win. And Aaron, if I'm not mistaken, I'm currently winning 3-2.
Get the fuck out of here. I don't care.
I love to throw that in your face. And this is your time.
It's always the fucking audience, man.
Well,
they always fuck me. Sorry, guys, but you do.
I love you, but goddamn you. All right.
I love you guys, but you really fucking me.
So make sure you guys check that out next week. Battle Royale number 6. Cannot wait to record that with you, Aaron. But that'll do it for episode 189. Please take us out of here.
All right. Make sure you go and place your bets on that Battle Royale on.
We got a free promo code over at
FanDuel and
FanDuel.
The over unders, all that shit.
OBP Ballsack get you 25% free credits.
Come on, guys. Like, vote for me. It's not that hard.
Aaron, no collusion.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Hanging Chad right here.
Anyways, subscribe to our podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. That's where we are. Thank you to our patrons: Alex, Alice, Aaron, Botter, Chris S, Chris Y, Chrissy, David, Elliot, Erica, George, Gianni, Greg, Haley, Ham, 6, Jake, Jeremy, Kyle, Lozy, Mike, Miles, Mike, Olivia, Ryan, I, Robert, Saunter, Sean, Trevor, Travis, Zach, and Brad and Lisa. If you want to support the show without spending a single penny, a follow on your preferred podcasting platform and a 5-star rating and or review on Apple Podcast, Apple, and Spotify helps the show a ton. Honestly, just go drop a couple of stars. You could really use
more than a couple, please. 5,
yeah,
preferably
5. A few stars. Follow us on social media: Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok at Oblivion Bar Pod. Official merch of the show. You can be found on our website, oblivionbarpodcast.com. Thank you, KXD Studios, for all of our Oblivion Bar art. He's at the KXD Graphics on Instagram. Thank you, Dream Kid, for all of our musical themes. Thank you, DJ Skyvac, for our grid theme. And last but not least, don't forget to tip your bartenders 20% or more, or Chris will lose the next Battle Royale.
And we need that to not happen, everybody. I need to win for my own ego and for my own personal record. So
what about my ego?
Well, Aaron, that's the thing about ego is that I always feel like mine's more important.
Dick.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us here on the Oblivion Bar podcast. We will see you next week for episode 190.